This week, on A Nice Cup of History, we're going to have another sombre episode. A lot of the time, we like to bring a bit of joviality to history, make light of it, because we recognise that history can be a heavy subject to learn, with lots of names and dates, etc. So we do try to make that learning fun.
But every so often we come across an event in history, more so in recent history to be honest, where that just isn't appropriate. Where we have to suspend the fun and focus solely on the facts, because they deserve to be reported. Sometimes history is uncomfortable to learn, and for good reason. If you're not disturbed by it, you won't ever learn from it.
Now, we do try to be objective, though there are some historical events or figures that excite us or whom we revile because we are only human. Because of this objectiveness, however, we are able to recognise that the actions of some are not to be blamed on the many, so we will refer to the effective villains of this piece by their names rather than their nationalities, though I doubt we'll be able to much hide our disdain for those specific people that caused this.
So this week we're going to cover the story of a young girl and her family who were forced to hide and who eventually lost everything because of the bigoted hatred of one man and his...
Sycophantic.
That's a cool word.
It just means like it's beyond fanatic. Like they lap up everything you do.
Sycophant.
Yeah.
We're of course talking about Anne Frank.
Because of the nature of this episode, we won't be doing our ridiculous death, just because it just didn't seem appropriate, to be honest with you. So just stay listening and just hopefully learn. For now, stay very quiet as you get your pen, open a fresh page in your diary, and let's get historical.
Now, we'll start where all good places start.
At the beginning?
Yes, I mean, I'm still going to be a little bit special.
Yeah, we can't help that.
No, but we'll start at the beginning, so the early years. Now, we aren't going to go too much into the cause of the events surrounding this. We want to give more airtime to the family and to Anne herself, as she deserves to have her story told, and it is what her father wanted, quite literally. We are instead going to assume a little bit of knowledge on your part of the events in Germany post-World War One and leading up to the Second World War.
If, however, you are unsure, we have done a separate episode on the Holocaust in honour of Holocaust Memorial Day, and we've covered both World Wars in We Will Remember Them. We are open to requests, however. If anybody would like to hear more about a specific battle, year or person, just contact us through our socials and we'll let you know when the episode is ready to air. Right, back to the story.
The thing we need to remember more than anything is that at the heart of this story is Anne Frank, and Anne was a girl. Just a girl trying to live a girl's life, trying to grow up with dreams of being a journalist and a writer, of having her voice heard. A dream that she achieved, but in the worst way, and because of the hateful rhetoric of one man that nobody stopped until it was far too late.
Anneliese Marie Frank was born in 1929 in the city of Frankfurt am Main in Germany. The youngest daughter of Otto and Edith Frank, she had a sister, Margot, who was 3 years her senior. At that time, unemployment rates were rocketing in Germany due to the harsh conditions set within the Treaty of Versailles following the end of the First World War. Inflation was out of control and poverty was rife. These were the perfect conditions for the rise of the fascist group later to be known as the Nazi Party, led by Adolf Hitler.
Hitler's hatred of the Jewish people was one of the cornerstones of his policy. He blamed them at heart for everything bad that had befallen Germany and the West. His effective use of propaganda and gift for oratory helped to demonize and dehumanize the Jewish people, turning many against them and setting the scene for genocide that was to come.
The growing hatred towards the Jewish people in Germany, along with the economic conditions, led to Anne's family leaving the land of their birth and moving to the Netherlands. There, Otto Frank founded a company in Amsterdam that traded in pectin, which is a gelling agent that they use in making jam.
As in jam the food?
Yeah.
Oh.
It just makes it that when you make jam at home and it's a little bit runny.
Yeah.
But you get jam in the shop and it's kind of pretty solid.
Mm-hmm.
That's the pectin.
See, I kept hearing, because obviously we went to Anne Frank house when we was in Amsterdam. I kept hearing that's what he did, but I didn't know what it was, and I didn't feel that was important to ask at the time.
Yeah, to be fair, there are more important questions. But that's what pectin is.
Oh, cool. The family took well to their new life in the Netherlands, Anne included. She and Margot learned Dutch, enrolled in local schools near to their house, made friends, and soon became, to all intents and purposes, Dutch.
Things weren't exactly straightforward for Otto Frank in business, and it was hard to get things off the ground. He attempted to begin a business venture in England, but this fell through. How different would things have been if he succeeded, I wonder?
Oh gosh.
Eventually, Otto added herbs and spices to his sales roster, and that's when things started to look up for them.
So that was the early years. So we're now going to get to the dawn of the war. So on the 1st of September 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland and the Second World War began. Things carried on normally for a while for the now 10-year-old Anne and her family, but they would not have escaped the news, listening on the wireless and reading in the papers of the advance of the Blitzkrieg.
On the 10th of May 1940, the Netherlands was invaded. It took 5 days for the Dutch army to surrender, and the Netherlands was brought under Nazi control. Slowly but surely, things began to change for the Frank family as the occupying forces stripped away Jewish liberties. Anne and Margot were made to transfer from their public school with all of their friends to a Jewish-only school.
Jewish people were prohibited from visiting parks, cinemas, and certain shops. They had to stick to certain areas and were not to mix with non-Jewish peoples. They were then blocked from owning and running their own businesses, which means that all of Otto's hard work was lost.
We are aware of these changes and others thanks to the reason that Anne Frank is famous, her diaries. On the 12th of June 1942, for her 13th birthday, Anne received a diary covered in red and white plaid fabric, and it's because of this humble book that we know about her and what happened to her family over the next few years. That diary has become arguably one of the most important historical documents of recent times.
The Star of David was introduced on clothing to mark Jewish people as separate from non-Jewish people. Then things began to get worse. Jewish people began to disappear. On the 5th of July 1942, Anne's sister Margot received a summons to report to an alleged labour camp located in Nazi-occupied Germany. With everything that was going on and the rumours beginning to circulate about those who had disappeared, the family felt that they were no longer safe living out in the open.
In early 1942, Otto Frank took a risk. He began to furnish the annex of the building where he had previously held his business, at Prinsengracht 263. He was helped by his former colleagues, and when it was ready, he moved his family in there, and the Franks went into hiding. The annex was hidden from view behind a false bookcase, but the presence of people still working in the warehouse below meant that the family had to stay quiet during much of the day, or else risk discovery.
So, in hiding. The premises in Prinsengracht were leased to Otto Frank by the Pirim family, and they continued as owners of the building, though they had no knowledge of the secret annex or the family living there.
On 13th of July 1942, the Frank family were joined by Hermann, August and Peter van Pels. They had lived in Osnabrück, Germany until 1937, where they too had moved to Amsterdam. Hermann van Pels had recently gone to work with Otto in his business Pectacon.
During the evenings and weekends, when the building was otherwise empty, Otto and Hermann would do little bits in relation to business correspondence to keep the business running from hiding.
In November 1942, the Frank and Van Pels family were joined by Fritz Pfeffer. He'd previously lived and worked as a dentist in Berlin with his young son Werner. He became involved following a divorce with a woman named Charlotte, and following the events in 1938 that became known as the Kristallnacht, they fled to the Netherlands. Fritz was forever separated from his son when they put him into the Kindertransport to England to be with Fritz's brother Ernst. They would never see each other again.
Kindertransport is the name of a play. I did it for my A-levels.
Really?
It's basically about a woman in Germany has a daughter, and the daughter gets put on Kindertransport and sent to England. She doesn't actually remember any of this, and then she grows up and has her own daughter who finds out that her mum is Jewish or was Jewish, and then they all everything comes out. You get transported back to Auschwitz, and at the end the mum survived Auschwitz. And that's who I played. I played the mum. I had to start off being German and prim and proper, and then had to be an old Auschwitz-ridden Jewish lady. I made people cry. I had a big old monologue at the end. Got an A star.
Well done.
Thank you.
It sounds like a very profound play, though.
It is.
I mean, heavy subject matter.
Oh, very. Yeah, very.
But a good way to learn about it.
Yeah, and it is really, really well written.
Okay.
Like, if you've got a chance to do it or read it, or you're doing it in school, it's good.
Okay.
So, back to Anne.
Yeah.
Fritz befriended Otto Frank when he had settled in Amsterdam and also got to know the Van Pels. He also got to know two others called Jan and Miep Guys, who both worked with Otto Frank. It was Jan and Miep who would help the Franks and Van Pels go into hiding, and Miep would later help Fritz join them.
Let's have a quick roll call for the frankly wonderful people who risk their lives on a daily basis to hide and look after the families. Already mentioned, we have Jan and Mike Geuss, a husband and wife who worked with Otto Frank and were good friends of the Frank family. Jan's main job was as a social worker, and he became involved in the resistance during the war, though it's not known what his role was there, and he never spoke about it.
Mertgeese would help to bring food to the families in hiding, to look after them, to the point where Anne referred to her in her diaries as a pack mule, marvelling at the amount she was able to carry. She would also provide library books to those in hiding and keep them company whenever it was safe to do so, which was rare indeed.
Also helping was Victor Kugler. When the Jewish people were no longer able to own businesses, the company was changed to the management of Gleiss & Co. This allowed the company to keep running and allowed for the space to continue to be used, so that the annex would then be a safe space for the families when they went into hiding. It was Kugler's idea to put a revolving bookcase in place to hide the entrance to the secret annex.
Johannes Kleiman was the right-hand man to Otto Frank. He also risked everything to keep the family safe. He became the point of contact should anything go wrong, and passed encrypted messages to family members letting them know that the Franks were safe, which was incredibly dangerous for him to do. He and his wife would visit, bringing information to Anne and her family of the outside world, of their own family, and Anne was able to live vicariously through their daughter Corrie. But the secret of keeping them safe took a physical toll on Kleinman, and he would often be ill.
And does mention it in her diaries that how worried they are about him and how dear he is to them, and like how they hope he'll recover, and they'll go and see him afterwards and make sure he's okay when it's all they're free and they're safe to go out. The final pair of main note are Johann and Bep Voskuil. Johann was an employee of Otto's company who later became a firm confidant and helper to the families. Along with his daughter Bep, it was Johann who constructed the bookcase that would be the final barrier between the families in hiding in the outside world. So it's Kugler's idea and Johann constructed it. Sadly, Voskuil became ill with stomach cancer and was forced to stop working, a loss felt keenly by Anne and noted in her diary. He would still visit, however, and it was decided that when the family was free, they would go and visit him.
Aww.
So they had plans to visit all these people when they were free, and that idea that they had that hope out there.
I guess you have to.
Yeah.
You have to have the hope. Otherwise, what else do you have?
That's true. Very true.
So that is leading up to all the horrible stuff. So we're now going to go into a timeline from when they went into hiding to when they were captured. So following the invasion of the Netherlands on the 10th of May 1940, they surrendered after 5 days. Queen Wilhelmina escaped to England, where she worked remotely to try and drum up resistance and aid for her country, which was a difficult venture. On the 14th of May of 1940, the bombing of Rotterdam led the Netherlands to final surrender. In the space of just 5 days, it was all under Nazi control.
It took until 1941 for the first load of Dutch Jews to be deported following mass raids. At this point, it became compulsory for identity cards to be carried by all Dutch people, a further way to mark out the Jewish people from the remainder of the population. And they do have a couple of those identity cards on display at the museum, don't they?
They do. From inside their annex, after they went into hiding in 1942, the families would have had limited word of the outside world, aside from the occasional conversations with helpers and in the papers. They would have learned that the deportation of Jewish peoples from the Netherlands continued. They would be taken to Westerbork and from there a concentration camp.
In May 1943, the head of the German SS Rauter decreed that no Jewish people were to stay in Amsterdam unless specifically permitted by a sparer, a document that proved they had permission to temporarily remain. Raids were held to round up Jewish people, and the Nazi secret police, the Gestapo, were employed to seek out any in hiding. Specific Dutch police called Jew hunters joined in to help.
Wow, what a name.
Yep. There's an official Dutch name for them, but I was not prepared to try and butcher that name.
Yeah, no. For the Franks, Van Pels and Pfeffer, it was a fraught couple of years, all of which Anne documented within her diary. Talking later on, Otto Frank remarked that Anne he saw in the pages was not the Anne he knew, that she was capable of more introspection and deep thought than he had ever seen in her.
Imagine going through your life knowing someone and then seeing this completely different side to them afterwards.
Yeah.
But it shows the importance of a diary because it's thoughts that you would never articulate to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Her diary during the time in hiding documented her growing relationship with her sister Margot, as well as her troubled relationship with her mother, including discussion of the contempt she felt for her, though she did later revise this as she grew to realise that arguments with her mother were also partly from her own misunderstandings. So it's literally watching her grow as a person.
Yeah, grow up.
Yeah.
It was her. She went in as she was like 13 and came out at 16, wasn't it, or something?
More or less, yeah.
Which is like massive in your life. They're like, I'd say you changed quite a lot in those 3 years.
Well,
you grow up.
that's the
quite
start of
considerably.
puberty, isn't it? That's when it all hits. So she would have been having all these raging hormones and everything within this confined space and having to deal with all of this.
Mm-hmm. Anne expressed a wish to become a journalist and a writer and began to redraft her diary as a book, The Secret Annex, in the hopes that when she was older it could be published.
When I write, she said, I can shake off all my cares. My sorrow disappears, my spirits are revived. Talking about her family, the friends who helped them, even her brief romance with Peter Van Pels, all gave a deep and thought-provoking insight into this difficult time, whilst Anne was coming into her own, with the undercurrent of what's going on in the world outside ever present.
One thing they would have heard about were the D-Day landings. Knowing that the Allies were coming, that they were so close, would have been a great source of hope to them. But fate was not to be that kind.
So that's the timeline. Now we're going to talk about the discovery.
Yay.
It isn't really known for sure how the families were discovered. One theory was that Nelly Voskuil, Bep's younger sister, who was a Nazi sympathiser, may have betrayed them. The only source for this, however, is a biography written by Bep's youngest son in collaboration with a journalist in 2015, so not a contemporary source. And we know as historians, contemporary sources are very important.
Yeah. Another theory brought about by an investigation carried out by Anne Frank House themselves suggested that it may have been as a result of an investigation carried out due to a suspected ration card fraud, though betrayal was not completely ruled out.
The truth is, we may never know how they were found. What we do know is that on the 4th of August 1944, Jan Gijs arrived at the warehouse and met Miep at the door. He recalled her saying, "Something is wrong here," and she was right. That day, the warehouse on Prinsengracht was stormed by a group of German Grundpolizei and the Dutch police, led by Karl Sieberbauer of the SD, the Nazi intelligence organisation.
All 8 of the people in hiding were arrested, along with Johannes Kleiman and Victor Kugler. It was Kugler who was forced to open the door to the secret annex, and it was he who had to deliver the news to Edith Frank with a single whispered word: Gestapo.
Jan Gijs managed to escape and was able to watch from a safe distance as the family were taken away. Kugler and Kleiman were detained at the penal camp in Amersfoort, Utrecht. Kleiman was only detained for 7 weeks, but Kugler moved around various concentration and prison camps until the end of the war. Neither regretted the help they had given to the families in hiding, and both were frankly heroes in our eyes.
But unbelievable.
You'd think they, I've seen interviews with people who helped Jewish people during the Second World War, and they say, oh, well, it's what anybody would do. It wasn't. There were enough people that didn't do it.
That's the problem.
Yeah, that's exactly the problem. And I would love to say that in that position I would do that. I would help them. But the threat of death, of arrest, of losing everything, it was enough to keep a lot of people in line.
Mm-hmm.
But the ones that did it, there's no kudos enough.
Nope, they were fab. That's like,
yeah.
I don't know. It sounds like there's nothing you can say. No, anything I say won't be good enough.
No.
So
no,
nope. Miep Gijs was questioned by the police but was not detained. Bep Voskuil. Thank you. Don't know what happened there. I think you know when you get like a burp stuck in your throat. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's all right. As long as you're not choking, that's all right.
No, I'm good. She managed to escape and was able to make sure that their contacts within the black market were kept secret. They both managed to go back to the annex where they were able to retrieve Anne's diaries and other writings, as well as a number of photo albums.
Miep Gijs did try to get the prisoners released through a payment to Silberbauer a few days after their arrest, but this was refused and their fate was sealed. The captives were sent to Westerbork, and from there they were deported as part of the last transport to Auschwitz concentration camp. There they were split into men and women. this would be the last time Otto Frank saw his family.
Anne Frank was just 15 years old when she was processed for the concentration camp. They were selected for work instead of immediate death in the gas chambers. Not knowing whether or not her father had to face the chambers, Anne was taken away with her mother and her sister. They were stripped naked, disinfected, their heads were shaved, and they would have had their identifying mark tattooed on their arms. A life of happiness, hopes, fears, complex thoughts and emotions, all instantly stripped away and reduced to a number, the ultimate final dehumanization.
We have few testimonials of Anne during her time at the camps, and none of her own writing from this time. We know that she was forced to carry out hard labour during the day, then sleep in diseased, dark, overcrowded barracks. She was able to show extraordinary strength and courage, though, despite her conditions.
Eventually, Anne and Margot were sent to the infirmary when Anne became infected with scabies. Edith left without her daughters, stopped eating, instead saving her food to be able to pass it to her daughters through a small gap in the infirmary wall. This infection stopped them from being transported to the Libau labour camp in October of 1944.
On the 28th of October, Anne and Margot Frank were part of the group of around 8,000 women moved to Bergen-Belsen. Edith Frank remained behind at Auschwitz, where she soon after died of disease and starvation.
When she got to Bergen-Belsen, Anne was reunited with two friends from Amsterdam, Hannelie Goslar and Nanette Blitz, who later recounted how shocked they were at seeing Anne as bald and emaciated. At the time, it is understood from Goslar and Blitz that August van Pelt had been sent to Bergen-Belsen with Anne and Margot and was looking after the latter, who was very sick.
In February and March 1945, an epidemic of typhus spread through the camp, killing approximately 17,000 prisoners. Margot and Anne both succumbed. Margot became so weak that she fell from her bunk, and it's believed the shock from the fall killed her. Anne is reported to have survived her older sister by only a day. The dates of their death are not recorded, but it is believed it was only a few weeks before British troops arrived on 15th of April 1945 to liberate the camp. The fact that they came so close.
I didn't actually realise that they died of typhus. But I thought that, because you get taught about, obviously, the 6 million Jews that were killed in concentration camps, you aren't ever really taught about other ways they died. Like you said that the disease was rife, there was gas chambers, but nothing specific. So I didn't know that they died of typhus. I just thought they died in a gas chamber like so many others.
But one of the most frustrating things about Anne Frank's story is how many times she came so damn close.
Yeah. Gets kind of sadder in my opinion though.
Yeah, that's what makes it worse.
Otto Frank survived his time in Auschwitz and returned to Amsterdam in June 1945 after the liberation by Allied forces. He learned of Edith's death, but still had hope that his daughters may have survived. He reunited with Jan and Miep Gijs, and they helped him try to locate his remaining family. He put out notices in the local newspapers and tried whatever methods were available to him. And we saw the notices. They have copies of the newspaper at the museum.
After several weeks, Otto found out from other survivors from Bergen-Belsen the terrible truth. He was the only surviving member of his family. Digging further into records and information, he learned that many of their friends and their children had been wiped out, whether by gas chamber, execution, or the harsh conditions of the camp. The toll of human life is incomprehensible.
I don't know if I could be the only one left of my family.
You don't know what you can survive until you have to survive it, but I genuinely don't think I would be strong enough for that.
Being the only one left.
And a parent to lose their child as well. To lose both of their children.
Poor man.
There are no words.
In July 1945, Miep Gijs gave Otto Frank the diaries that she had rescued that belonged to Anne. It took him some time, but eventually he read them. Touched by her regular mentions of wanting to be an author, Otto tried a number of ways to get the diaries published, meeting with rejection until 1950, where they were published in Germany and France, then in 1951, the United Kingdom, and 52 in America.
The Diary of Anne Frank is now available in over 70 languages and has spawned films, TV miniseries, plays, and even manga. The building on Prinsengracht is now a museum called the Anne Frank House. You do have to book in advance as it is very popular, but it is well worth it. There is also a virtual tour available online for those unable to get to the museum. We when we went, they do have audio tours that you
Hmm.
can walk around, and they can be in whatever language you require. Um, yeah, it was. I'm glad we went. I
Oh
am glad
God,
we
yeah.
went.
Honestly, since my parents went to Amsterdam when I was a teenager, and they bought me the Diary of Anne Frank, and I read it, and since then I've wanted to go. It's one of those I just need. I don't know why. I just felt the need to have to go at some point.
It's the same as I don't know if wanted is quite the right word, but I've always wanted to go to Auschwitz.
Oh, I want to go to Auschwitz.
Yeah, it's it's one of those things that you have to do because it's
Mm.
you have to, as we said at the beginning, you have to be made to feel uncomfortable so that
Hmm.
it doesn't happen again,
Yeah,
which it's very likely to happen again.
yeah. I went to a concentration camp. GCSEs. My school went to Berlin,
Mm-hmm.
and we went to Sachsenhausen
All right, okay.
in Berlin, the concentration camp in Berlin, and that was like horrendous enough. Um, and it wasn't on the same level as Auschwitz.
Auschwitz is
That was bad enough.
the camp. It's like the most popular one,
Yeah,
isn't it? You think concentration camp, you're going to think
yes.
Auschwitz.
I remember like just no birds flew over
See, I've heard that a lot.
at all, and it was weird. It was like not that you'd want to, but as soon as we walked through the gate, you could not smile, you could not laugh. Not that
Things
there was
like that
anything
leave
you'd
a
want to.
scar, though, don't they?
Yeah, it's not like you'd want to. And I remember that I was 16, and I remember exactly how it felt going to that concentration camp.
The the thing that I find interesting is there's there's nothing behind glass. There's no museum type thing
No.
in them. You can walk around, and I think that's interesting, but also brilliant because you don't want to lock off any part of that anymore. Those spirits deserve to be free.
Mm, yeah, but I don't know what I expected of Anne Frank's house.
I To be honest, I was surprised because they don't have the furniture in there anymore. Um,
they haven't
yeah,
since they left.
yeah, they had it removed, and Otto
Otto
Frank,
Frank's request.
yeah, he didn't want it put back in again. So you walk around and you're like, actually, it's not as small as you'd think. But then you picture it with the furniture. They've got pictures with the furniture, and like,
Yeah,
actually, yeah, it would have been.
it's more when you've taught about it in school. I thought it was one room.
Mm.
Anne Frank, they lived in this one room in the back of in an annex. And don't get me wrong, it's not big. And
No.
being in there for 2 years would literally drive you mental.
Mm-hmm.
But it was about 5 rooms.
Yeah,
It was like it was a small house.
but somehow that's worse because they've got space to move around when you really shouldn't be moving around.
Yeah,
And you know that the building's a couple of 100 years old, I think. So you know it's kind of
yeah.
very creaky floors
It's
and
still got the
things.
original like kitchenette bit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Artwork on the walls,
Yeah,
posters, pictures.
yeah, they got all the posters that Anne and Margot put above their beds. So they've covered that bit in glass so that
Yeah, one room was Anne shared with Peter Van Pels.
mm,
Um, that was the smallest room, it kind of like in the middle.
yeah.
Um, but you kind of go in and you walk around the building, and they have different parts of the diary written on the walls, and the audio thing that you listen to kind of corresponds to where you are in the room. So you're walking around. You start off by walking around like the office building.
Yeah.
And you see pictures of, like we said, like Kugler and the geysers and all that. So it's good that they kind of have bits dedicated to them.
Yeah, and they have interviews with them as well,
Mhm.
so you can hear, and with Otto Frank, you can actually hear their voices.
Yeah. And then you see the bookcase.
Yeah.
And it is the original bookcase. That is behind a bit of glass, and
Yeah,
it
you're not
asks
allowed
you
to
not
touch
to
it.
touch it because it is so fragile.
Yeah.
But there's like, it was the detail to the people making that bookcase, like all the books on it, and there's
Mhm.
files, and you know those box files that you get in offices.
Yeah.
I remember looking at them, and it has like dates on and names.
It looked so normal, didn't it? But what I liked is the way the museum's set out. As you're going through the main warehouse and office bit, it's the lead up to it, what's
Yeah.
happening, and then when you go upstairs into the annex, it's what happened next, and
Yeah.
then you come back down again. And right at the very end, they've got the original her original diaries there,
Yeah.
behind glass to have a look at. But
Her actual handwriting.
you do see, like they've got the transport video for Vesterbork camp and everything that was shot there by that was filmed there. Sorry, it's probably not the right word to use. Filmed there by one of the prisoners. Yeah, it was just. It's weird because you can hear people talking and people will mutter to each other, and then as you get into the annex, the talking kind of dies down, and then as you get to the last bit and you realise what happened, it just everyone was quiet.
Yeah, it's so odd. And all I kept saying, and I keep saying about it, is there is so much I want to say, but also there are no words.
Yeah, I just I went in expecting to feel sad, which you do feel sad, but I just felt so angry that one person's hatred or the hatred of a small group of people could cause this.
How? Not just how. Obviously, we know how. It's documented how they came up with the final solution and all this bullshit. So we know physically how, but also how.
How and why?
How?
How can you hate a race of people that much?
And how did it get? How did the world allow one person to kill 6 million others in quite an inhumane way?
Yeah, and in such a short space of time.
Yeah, I don't understand. I can't understand. I guess you can say that some of the Western allies and stuff didn't know it was happening, but there's a lot of people who did.
Yeah, and then when we did know what was happening, did we act fast enough and hard enough?
I don't know.
There's so many what ifs.
Yeah, I don't understand. I mean, see, there are words, but then there are no words.
And things we've looked into like the darkest, ickiest parts of history.
Yeah.
There is nothing to compare to that.
But it was in living memory, which is even more insane. Not our living memory.
No, but
my grandparents were born in 1934.
My grandparents fought in the Second World War.
My nan and granddad were born in 1934 and they're still alive.
Yeah.
Like, literally, they were 11 when the war ended.
There are people alive who were children in concentration camps. And yet, and this is the thing that pisses me off so much, there are people who are denying that the Holocaust ever happened. How dare they?
I don't even know. That's why things like Anne Frank's diary and the house,
yeah,
and Auschwitz and Sachsenhausen, it's so important that they weren't knocked down and erased. It's so important that people still go. And yes, I've seen the recent upset with Auschwitz. Some woman put a picture on TikTok of her posing, sitting on the train tracks. She's literally sat like posing and her boyfriend's taking a photo.
Seriously?
And that has had quite a lot. But it's important that we get to go.
Yeah, it's
and they're still standing. You have to. There is absolutely no way on this earth that it should ever be forgotten.
No.
At all.
And it would have been so easy just to knock it down and pretend it never happened.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that they keep it going, that they keep it alive, it's to tell the stories of people like Anne Frank, the people who didn't have the diaries. It's to tell their stories and to as a warning should it happen again.
Yeah. And there are certain things at Anne Frank House in the gift shop specific that I didn't kind of agree with.
Mm.
Like, they've actually bought out the diary that you can buy. Like, you can buy a blank diary that is the white and checked plaid cover, which is obviously a good, and all the money goes back into the Anne Frank House, so I guess it's good. But I just kind of feel
it's a bit morbid.
Do you need it? What else was in there? Oh, you could also buy 3D puzzle of Anne Frank House.
Yeah.
Is it needed?
But the money goes back into the education and the restoration of the house. So.
But I get it. They've got all the books, and they've got Anne Frank's diary in every language you could possibly think of.
Yeah.
I've already got it. So I bought a bookmark.
See, I read it at school, but I've never owned a copy of it. I got a copy for my mum. As a little gift for her, because she had it when she was a little girl as well, and she's never owned a copy of it since she's grown up. So she's currently reading that at the moment. But I do recall that she got me to watch. I think it came out in the 50s. There was a film, The Diary of Anne Frank, and we watched that, and that was the first time I'd properly heard of Anne Frank. Before we'd learned about her in school, and yeah, I remember watching the film and just sobbing.
I don't think I've ever seen a film.
Really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I never have. I've watched documentaries. Like, there's actually one on Netflix right now,
All right.
which I watched the other day actually. And in Bergen-Belsen, they actually have Anne and Margot Frank have got a gravestone.
Oh, good.
It's pretty known that they were buried in the mass grave in Bergen-Belsen, where there's literally thousands of bodies. And there's actually no way anyone is going to dig them up. And as nice as it might be to dig up the bodies and try and find out who is who,
mammoth task, and just
let
at this
them
point,
rest.
yeah, just let them rest.
But they know that they died there, so Otto had a grave constructed that says Anne and Margot Frank.
That's fair.
Yeah, which I liked that was there. And it's told through the eyes of the documentary. It's weird. It's going to sound crazy when I explain it. Dame Helen Mirren is narrating it and reading bits of the diary inside Anne Frank's house, or a makeup of Anne Frank's house with all the bedding, with all the furniture in it.
Right, okay.
And then it goes to modern day, where you're following this girl who's tweeting, going from Germany through to Amsterdam and then back to Bergen-Belsen.
Right, okay.
And it ends at the graves. And then it goes back and it ends with the girl coming in, because she's the same age as Anne Frank was, and Helen Mirren opening the door for her, and she sits on the bed.
Okay.
But it's a full-on documentary, but it's told in like a really storylized way. It's really cool. It's on Netflix now. A two-parter.
I'll have to have a look at that.
Yeah, it was really cool. But I've never seen a movie which, if you look on our socials, actually, we have done videos of our time in Amsterdam. Lots of content. And I did take some pictures around Anne Frank's house. And one of them is an Oscar, because the person who played Anne in Anne Frank's in the 50s won an Oscar for her performance.
To be fair, I get why it was. Yeah.
I've not seen. I didn't even know it was a play. One that I would quite like to direct. I've pitched it to my local Amdram group, so we shall see.
Hopefully, because I think that would
be a story. We need to keep telling this story.
Absolutely.
There's not much we can do. Like we're two, I guess we're two. We've got some privilege. We live in England, which is quite rich. We grew up quite well. There's not much we can do. We're not rich, so we can't give a shit ton of money. But what we can do is talk about it, get the facts right, keep remembering, make sure no one forgets.
We can tell you the story so that you can tell the story.
Yeah.
And that's
the
best way to keep someone alive, to tell their story.
Absolutely have to.
We would recommend that you read the diaries if you get the chance. It was her dearest wish to be an author, to be a journalist, and to have her voice heard. Her father ensured that happened, so now we're going to leave you with some of Anne's own words that describe her legacy far better than we ever could, and describe the spirit that nothing, not even the hatred of one minority taken out in the worst way, could ever truly destroy.
I want to be useful or bring enjoyment to all people, even those I've never met. I want to go on living even after my death. And that's why I'm so grateful to God for having given me this gift, which I can use to develop myself and express all that's inside me.